You meet every deadline, solve the complex problems at work, and project absolute control. But beneath that exterior, the structural integrity is failing, the weight is becoming intolerable, and no one around you sees the stress fractures. In clinical psychology, this is recognized as the silent breakdown of the cognitively gifted adult. The common assumption is that high intelligence acts as a shield. Society assumes that if your brain can process massive amounts of complex data, it naturally regulates your emotional state just as efficiently. The data points in the opposite direction. Profound cognitive capability often acts as an accelerant. It camouflages distress. You become so adept at appearing highly functional that the people around you, and sometimes even your therapists, miss the signs of collapse. You do not have a broken mind. What you are experiencing is the logical result of operating a high-performance processing system under a destructive psychological architecture. Look at this bridge schematic under load. Outside, it holds firm. Internally, microstructures are glowing red, absorbing catastrophic stress. To understand this, we isolate 3 specific points of failure: developmental architecture, neural routing, and social isolation. By treating this exhaustion as a predictable mechanical failure rather than a personal defect, we can finally begin to dismantle the trap. We start with the foundational architecture, the environment typically labeled gifted child syndrome. Psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades tracking the exact impact of early validation on high-aptitude children. She observed a consistent pattern. Gifted children are rewarded for their traits. They receive constant praise for being smart, rather than for the process of working through a difficult problem. This specific reinforcement misconfigures identity formation. The child learns to tie their total self-worth directly to immediate, effortless success. The resulting feedback loop binds their ego to a permanent state of high achievement. Over years, that loop hardens into what Dweck defines as a fixed mindset. The architecture becomes entirely rigid. There is zero tolerance built in for adaptation or error. This creates massive structural vulnerability. When this mind encounters a genuine failure later in life, the event isn't processed as a simple data point. It registers as a threat to the core identity, an ego death. At this stage, perfectionism stops being an ambition. It mutates into a strictly biological survival mechanism. Your brain demands flawless execution simply to protect the fragile ego from collapsing. The result is a generation of outwardly impressive adults who possess massive technical competence, yet lack the internal tools to process complex emotional setbacks. The specific conditions that guaranteed your early academic success left you vulnerable to late-stage psychological fragility. The system was optimized to protect a label, leaving it entirely unequipped to process reality. That psychological software runs on highly active neurological hardware. When a high-bandwidth brain encounters severe stress, the actual routing of energy shifts. The brain relies on the default mode network, or DMN. In a healthy state, the DMN is an analytical engine designed to navigate external puzzles and project future scenarios. Clinical psychologist Dr. Susan Nolan-Hexema researched how this network behaves when high intelligence confronts acute psychological distress. She found that the high-processing brain makes a critical error. It treats emotional pain as an intellectual puzzle. It assumes that if it can just analyze the data hard enough, the pain can be algebraically solved. Without an external target to solve, that massive processing power reverses direction. The energy bounces off the internal boundaries of the skull and collapses inward, forming a tight, endless feedback loop. Nolan-Hexema identified this as a catastrophic rumination loop. The brain continuously cycles through distress, generating massive cognitive heat, all under the false illusion that it is actively solving a problem. This is incredibly dangerous for the gifted mind. Your intellect is sharp enough to build flawless, logically unassailable arguments to justify your own depression. This is why being told to just stop overthinking is completely ineffective. You cannot casually power down a massive processing engine that is currently running at maximum capacity to protect you. Your intelligence traps itself. It deploys its greatest asset, relentless critical analysis, to perfectly rationalize and sustain a state of hopelessness. The architecture is rigid, the hardware is overheating, and then we add the final compounding factor, the statistical reality of isolation. Humans regulate their nervous systems through cognitive mirroring. We subconsciously look for our intellect and emotional pacing reflected in our peers to feel grounded. Look at the standard deviation bell curve for cognitive ability. The vast majority of the population sits securely in the middle. The gifted individual exists in this narrow sliver on the extreme right tail, at least 2 standard deviations from the norm. If you map daily social interactions from that point, the statistical probability of encountering a cognitive peer is low. The radius expands, but captures almost 0 matching data points. This creates a chronic deficit in peer validation. To function in daily life, you learn to constantly downshift. You suppress your natural processing speed just to interface smoothly with the rest of the world. You build a competence shell. It's a highly functional mask worn to navigate society while hiding the deep internal exhaustion of constantly translating yourself. Your profound sense of loneliness is not a symptom of antisocial behavior. It is a literal mathematical deficit of intellectual peers. That isolation seals the echo chamber. A silent breakdown occurs when you misallocate your cognitive bandwidth. Your intelligence is functioning, but it's being directed into a closed loop. The architectural fix requires applying Dweck's growth mindset to your adult identity. You have to actively detach your core worth from continuous, effortless competence. Watch the structure adapt. The rigid, brittle box breaks apart and fluidly rebuilds into a flexible, expanding lattice. It allows stress to pass through without shattering the system. To fix the hardware, we have to break Nolan Hoeksema's rumination loop. The only way to stop the overheating is to give the processor an external target. The tight rumination loop snaps open. The energy shifts and is aggressively directed outward into active creation. The brain is no longer consuming itself. Your exhaustion is logical. It is the result of running a massive engine in a closed, unventilated room for decades. When you correct the architecture and vent the heat, the internal stress fractures cool down. The massive load is now evenly distributed across a structure designed to hold it. Managing your intellectual capabilities requires a bespoke operating system. By understanding the literal mechanics of your mind, you can finally carry your brilliance without breaking under its weight.